This video is brought to you by Knowledge at the Australian School of Business. For more information, please visit knowledge.asb.unsw.edu.au.
Ignorance is often said to be bliss, until that is, we find out just how ignorant we are and just how much it's going to cost us, particularly for people saving for retirement for their old age. It's often only when people get around to the first day of their retirement, when they're looking forward to the golden years of their lives, do they realise just how much they don't know. And that can often mean that they don't have enough in their pension pot to save and to have enough cash for the golden years of their retirement. Well, research by Professor Olivia Mitchell from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania shows that for many people, they don't even know what they should be saving. They can't calculate the outcome. Many of us don't even know how long we're going to be living, and another financial crisis could just knock all our financial planning into the long grass. Olivia's here at the Australian School of Business to talk about the implications of the global financial crisis on retirement savings. And Olivia, if I can start with initially, there almost seems to be this silver lining coming through in some of your research in terms of the financial crisis, because it's highlighted the fact that many of us need to think a little bit more about saving for retirement.
Well, indeed, I think this is a teachable moment. I think that we have the opportunity in this circumstance to get people thinking at all different ages about how they need to prepare better for retirement, save more, invest more cleverly and diversify, and then, of course, at the retirement point, to manage the money more sensibly so they don't run out.
And you say in your research as well that people seem to be woefully financially ignorant. Have you got some figures to back this up with?
Well, it's very interesting. We've started with a study in the United States called the Health and Retirement Study, and there we've asked a representative sample of people over the age of 50 a question like, what are the chances of getting a disease? If 10% of people out of 1,000 have the probability of getting a disease, how many of them will actually get it? And what we find is that very few people can actually answer that. Then we ask them about diversification. What's safer, a stock or multiple of mutual fund of stock? Very few people get that right. What's interesting now is we've taken that series of questions and asked them around the world in a number of different countries. And in fact, here at the Australian School of Business, there's a group of people comparing the Australian and the US numbers, and they're remarkably similar. So widespread financial illiteracy is very common. And not only that, it's related to lack of saving, lack of planning, and in general, what portends to be a very unpleasant retirement.
So if it's pretty similar around the world, is there actually any difference then in terms of how well educated people are in terms of how they plan for retirement?
Indeed. What we find is that, thankfully, because I'm an educator, more educated people do tend to perform better on these questions. They specifically are able to understand inflation better, compound interest better, the things that are really important to long-term investing. We also find that certain groups have more trouble. So, for example, lower paid employees, and in most countries, actually women as well. That's very important because women tend to outlive their spouses, live a long time anyway, and therefore be very much at risk in retirement for falling short.
And why women in particular? Why is that issue there?
That's a fascinating question, and one that we have to look more in depth at. In many countries, I think the explanation is that women, either by choice or by culture, have their husbands do all the financial management. And then if they're left widowed, as so often happens, they're up the creek. Also, I think in the past, women earned less than men, and to the extent they earned less, then they cared less about the financial outcomes.
And how about ignorance about life expectancy? We're talking about here people being asked how long they expect to live, and have you come up with any answers?
Well, it's very interesting because retirement calculators are quite available now online on the internet. But one of the things they typically do is they ask you your age and your sex, and then they say, bang, you have 16.4 years left to live. To my mind, that's exactly the wrong way to go about thinking about retirement security. That is, they tell you your life expectancy, but what they don't emphasize is how long you actually might live, to 99 or 102 or even 120. And so that's what we need to get people thinking more about, is the risk of surviving a very long time. And of course, how expensive that will be as well.
And this is very significant in terms of what's called a tail risk, isn't it?
Absolutely. What we find is that people have a fair idea of their chances of living to be, say, 75 years old. But it gets less and less realistic if we ask them what are the chances that they might live to 85 or 95. So, for example, people tend to hit the life expectancy about right, but they vastly underestimate the chances of living a long time, 85 or 95. Consequently, they might be likely to save too little, spend it too quickly, and end up short.
Okay, so we know what people don't know, if you like. It's a known unknown. What seems to be the great impediment to people learning about this? Why don't people just do their own research?
Well, of course, as an economist, we do encourage people to study more and take more responsibility. I think there are a couple factors. One is that in the past, governments and employers were very much protective. That is, they said, don't you worry your pretty little head about it. We'll manage your retirement security for you. Governments and employers are less able to do that now, especially post-financial crisis, assuming we're post. The other problem, of course, is that it's complicated, and many people are quite insecure about being able to invest and learn about what it takes to make sensible financial decisions. I suppose the third reason might be that it's not so appealing to defer consumption. In other words, it's a lot more fun to go out and buy a new pair of shoes or a car or what have you, whereas saving for retirement requires one to defer consumption to perhaps many years down the road. And kids have a hard time with that.
Now, you're talking about if people should be deferring their consumption, then maybe they should be working a little bit longer. And your research was suggesting 75 years of age as a point where people may be considering early retirement in the future. This may horrify many people who'd assume that 55 was early retirement and 60 maybe if they want to carry on working a little bit longer.
It seems to me the reality that we face in all developed countries, and in fact in many developing countries as well, is that more and more we're going to live to be very, very old. Some of the medical journals have now predicted that babies born today have a very good shot at living to be 100. What that means is that it's extremely expensive to spend 40 or 50 years not working. It's simply not viable. So what we have to do is encourage people to think about working longer, about extending their retirement date perhaps to 75 if they possibly can. Of course, not everyone can. There will be those that either suffer physical frailty or mental disability and cannot. But in this more technological world, it is possible for people to continue working longer. So it seems to me the most important outcome is to rethink the definition of retirement and not to think about sitting on the front porch on a rocking chair or playing golf, but maybe remaining engaged as long as possible.
But how can they do that if maybe they're not that well educated and then they're 45, 50, they may be looking for a new job and there quite simply is nothing for them other than retirement?
This is certainly a consideration. I think what it means is we have to start getting people from high school or even younger thinking about not a 20-year work career or even 30, but a 40 or 50-year work career.
And of course, where people put their money while they're actually in that process of working. Many people, of course, certainly if they just put money into a standard pension, may think they've got no connection with shares at all. After all, money just goes off into a little pot somewhere, doesn't it? They don't realise the connection between saving for a pension and the fact that much of that money is actually in equities. Is there again a question for education there and people realising the risks?
Well, it's fascinating to get people to think about the risk associated with investment in shares or other sorts of assets. The conventional wisdom, of course, is that as you get close to retirement, you should go into safer and safer, but the young people can take a lot of risk. And I think that's probably still accurate. On the other hand, if you're talking to a 60 or 65-year-old, that person may have 25 or 30 years remaining, and it's not necessarily sensible or economically viable for that individual to put zero in the share market. Of course, the Australian share market has been doing much better than the US share market. So I suppose people in Australia would have a more positive outlook in terms of the share market.
Yeah, and in fact, if we look at Australia for retirement savings, to have the mandatory limits to force people, if you like, in Australia to save for their retirement, the stock market as well seems to be doing very well. So are people around the world looking at the Australian system and thinking, actually, maybe to legislate, to force people to save, that's the way to go?
Well, a few years ago, I served on the Presidential Commission to restructure Social Security in the U.S. And indeed, the Australian model was one that we discussed very vigorously, and several of us encouraged it. Now, of course, we do have a mandatory contribution to an old age Social Security scheme, which is run by the government, which is not investment-based. And so we proposed the sort of mandatory model you had here. But at the time, there was a lot of pushback. And then, of course, the stock market and the war hit and everything else. And so here we are several years later with really no solution to the Social Security problem. But I would say everybody does recognize the value of the Australian system and holds it up as a wonderful model.
And how about lessons from around the world as well in terms of annuities? After all, it's not just saving for retirement. You've got to reach that point and then work out how you're going to eke out that money for the rest of your life, which is we've just discussed, maybe for an extra 50 or 60 years in retirement. The UK, for example, has the annuities model, and there a large proportion of people will put cash into annuities that will save for the rest of their lives. In Australia, I think it's less than 1%. So what again can we learn from other parts of the world?
Trying to protect against longevity risk is really a challenge because, again, people don't necessarily understand the risk because they underestimate their survival chances. And they worry that if they put their money into an insurance payout product, if they die too soon, then the insurance company gets all the money. Of course, that's not strictly true. What happens is the individual who does in fact pass away young, his assets go to protect someone who lives to be very, very old. But it's true, I think the Australian system has a challenge in getting people to think about protecting against longevity. One of the countries that's taken a great step forward in this regime is Singapore, because Singapore has actually recently mandated the purchase of deferred annuities. That is, at age 55, you buy a promise that you will receive an annuity the rest of your life should you be still alive at 75 or 80 years old. So it's not very expensive, but it really protects you against that catastrophe of living very long and running out of money.
And equally, if we're talking about risk and the risk of your cash not lasting when you do reach old age, we've got political risk as well. Look at Argentina, for example. There, the government recently decided that actually maybe private schemes weren't such a good idea, and a government IOU was a much better plan. Have you done some research in that area?
It's certainly the case that many countries in Latin America have looked to the country of Chile, where they mandated a defined contribution scheme back in 1981. So it's been a number of years now. And that's been an enormously popular and very successful plan, quite similar to the Australian plan, actually. One of the countries that has fared less well in that regard is Argentina. They followed the Chilean model in mandating a pension, but then at one point, with the government running short of cash, they decided to use the pension reserves to pay back their foreign debt. I don't advocate that, but it definitely highlights the role of political risk. Even in the best of all circumstances, your money can be confiscated. I do believe, however, that personal accounts where individuals own the retirement pot, that's much safer against political risk than some of the other alternatives, such as having the government spend it, as we do in the U.S. with our pay-as-you-go system.
But for those people who are looking at just hanging on to their money and really having total control over what they're doing, for many years we were told, well, look at housing, for example. It's as safe as houses, isn't it? Rare for house prices to go down, and after all, if you hit trouble in your old age, well, of course, you can always sort of mortgage just a little bit so you've got some cash to live on. The experience of the US, and in fact many other areas, not Australia at the moment, our house prices seem to be plateauing here, but if we look at the experience around the world, houses really aren't a very safe option either, are they?
Well, it's certainly the case that having a single house is not a diversified asset. And that's something that we've learned in the U.S. with quite a rude shock, with some locales experiencing declines in housing prices of 30 or 40%. And they haven't popped back, even though the stock market is performing much better now. That's not to say that real estate as an asset class is undesirable. In fact, most of the advisors will say that perhaps you should have up to 10% of your total wealth in real estate. But that would be in a diversified real estate fund, not necessarily in a single house. The problem that I think many of the baby boomers face, and I'm a baby boomer, is that many of us have put pretty much all of our liquid savings over the years into the house. And the good news is you get to live in it, but the bad news is it's very hard to raise equity against it, should you need to now. So that's, I think, changed people's perception of the role of the house in the retirement portfolio.
And what else can we learn from the global financial crisis if we're really discovering that maybe houses aren't very safe and it's a real risk in some countries that say the government may come along and help themselves to a little bit? What else can we learn from the financial crisis?
Well, it seems to me that it's always going to be a question of risk management. You do your best to save and diversify and protect against longevity. The one degree of freedom that we have to emphasize, I think, is the one of deferring retirement. That is, as long as you're able to continue to work, even half-time or in a post-retirement job, that offers you an income. It means that you don't have to draw down your assets as quickly in retirement. And by the way, recent research shows that delaying retirement is good for your mind. In other words, people who delay retirement tend to be more mentally acute longer than people in countries where retirement is very early. So this, I think, is another piece of new insight that we need to build into our planning.
And hopefully educate people about. Professor Olivia Mitchell, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
For more business news and analysis from Knowledge at the Australian School of Business, please visit knowledge.asb.unsw.edu.au.